access, and you have note cards and pens in front of you. And as Scott is talking, if you have any questions that you want to address after, we will have two panels, one on non-packaging EPR, and then we'll have a quick break, refresh everybody's coffee, and then we'll have our second panel on packaging EPR. And those note cards will come in handy. You will see people in blue shirts or with the star emblem on them, and they will help to take your cards and run them up to Ed Scarnolis, who is going to be our moderator for both panels. So we have our index cards and we have our pens. We all know how to use them. So we look forward to some good questions for our panelists. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce Scott Cassell. Scott is the Executive Director of the Product Stewardship Institute, and they have a booth out front, so I encourage everyone to go by and read their trifold and learn more about them there. But the Product Stewardship Institute pursues initiatives to ensure that all those involved in the life cycle of a product share responsibility for reducing its health and environmental impacts. Prior to founding the Institute in 2000, Scott served 7 years as the Director of Waste Policy and Planning for the Massachusetts Executive Office of Environmental Affairs. He is also a founding board member and past president of the North American Hazardous Materials Management Association, whose mission is to reduce the toxicity of the municipal solid waste stream. We have lots of Texas members of NAHAMA in the audience, and we're very happy to have them here as well. Scott has worked on product and waste management issues for the past 25 years for a startup solid waste management company, nonprofit statewide environmental group, and several other governmental agencies. He is also a syndicated newspaper columnist in Massachusetts and writes a monthly environmental column for the Boston Business Journal. So if you don't get enough of him here, you can read his words directly from the page. So that's a good thing to make note of on your note cards. He literally wrote the chapter on product stewardship into the 2008 Handbook of Household Hazardous Waste. He has a master's degree in environmental policy and dispute resolution from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and an undergraduate degree in geology and environmental studies from the University of Pennsylvania. Please help us welcome to Texas, Scott Cassell. This is the part of the show where I show how well I am at AV stuff. So we do have one of our AV people in the room.
Well, Maya's, thank you very much, Maya. While Maya's getting things together here, I want to just say thank you for inviting me here to Austin, and the mayor's awesome. It's just great that he knows so much about all the issues that we know, probably a lot more than many of us here, and he's got so many issues to deal with and understands them to a very great degree. So very impressive, and it's a very impressive city here. I wanted to tell you some of the travels that I've been going through, because I've been talking about product stewardship in a lot of different places. Been to the Aluminum Association in Chicago, the Plastics Recyclers in Denver, this group Pack Next, which I'll talk to you about. It's the brand owners on packaging, reducing waste. They were in Toronto. I was in Halifax to talk to the Canadian Council on Product Stewardship with Garth on a panel. Garth Hickel, you'll hear from him in a little bit. And then I was in a place called Deadwood, South Dakota. There's 1,300 people there, and I think the conference I was at doubled the size. It was the Council of State Retail Association, so the retailers invited me to speak on product stewardship. And then I was just in Portland, Oregon for the PSI, our national conference on product stewardship with the NAMA organization, which was just mentioned. There's a lot of things going on product stewardship. And this is another indication, this conference here, about what's going on. So now I've landed in the land of music. This is the what do you call it, the live music capital of the world. All right. So.
Sing for us, Scott.
I don't sing, but those of you that know me know that there's another live music aspect of me. this. I don't know if this one's working. Can you hear me all right with this one? Sorry? All right, good. With the harmonica, you know, you never know. I never miss an opportunity, just play a little bit, and here in Austin, I hope to hear some of the music. So that's really great. I guess we're still trying to get up the PowerPoint presentation. Is that right? I think so. Mine just skipped out on me.
They thought you were going to play long.
I think. Where do I go from here? I can talk about product stewardship and the Product Stewardship Institute. Do I hear any requests? Okay. So, I'm going to give it a try. I have an idea. I have a stick.
Pardon our technical difficulties. We are an all-volunteer staff, so it's not the AV guy at the hotel's fault. We are looking for it now. We have. Thank you for that solo, Scott. That was improv timing, but we will get that presentation loaded. So continue to enjoy your breakfast. We'll get it done as soon as we can.
Yeah. Good. For mom and dad. I'm listening to this one.
How many did you say was it? 200?
It was separate, like 187. That was sweet.
Yeah, they got it. They're running it up.
When I brought up the service. Shout out.
I knew it every time.
So right at like 9:30. It cut out.
Yeah. Well, I won't make the students sweat. Colorado.
Terribly sorry for that.
Out there and give presentations.
So now we have all figured out the computer, all is right with the world. Once again, Scott Dixon.
All right. So, did I tell you I was in lots of places and All right, here we go. This is this is the way it always happens, right? You got to keep carrying on. So, hello everybody in that side of the room. Hello everyone on this side of the room. Write down your questions. What I'm going to do here is to give a basic presentation about product stewardship, about extended producer responsibility, and basically tee it up for the panels that are coming. You got a lot of distinguished folks here that are going to talk about packaging and non-packaging, EPR. So I'm going to just give some information that hopefully will be a basis for the next presentations, okay? So, Product Stewardship Institute, our organization is national. We were founded in 2000. We just celebrated our 10th year anniversary in Portland, Oregon at our conference last week. We have 47 states that are members of our organization, including Texas, at the gubernatorial appointee level, so the Texas State Environmental Agency. We have over 200 local governments as well, including Fort Worth and other local governments. But we have partnerships with 75 companies, organizations, universities, and non-US governments. So the organization itself is multi-stakeholder. We have a board of state officials and local officials, but multi-stakeholder partnerships. We founded the organization to be a unified voice for state and local governments. So a lot going on in product stewardship, but there wasn't a voice for the governments themselves. And that is something which was detrimental to the government agencies, but also the businesses as well, because you have lots of different voices out there for states. And what we wanted to do was not just have unilateral legislation to fight it out, duke it out, but it was to try something else, to get together, to collaborate on policies, to harmonize policies nationally, and to do it with all the different stakeholders. So we start with, on every single product that we work on, and we're working on over 15 different product categories. We start with the problem. If you can't agree on what the problem is, you can't agree on the solution. And it may seem simpler than it really is, but you have to get consensus on what's the problem. What are we trying to figure out? Now, with all the different work that we're doing, the problem that we boil it down to is, and I think you'd agree, most products are not sustainable. They have toxics, they're not recyclable, and they're designed, for disposal. So it's that kind of cycle that we're trying to break. That's in the big sense of what we're talking about. But on another level, and I know Will Sager is going to talk more about this, in terms of translating the resources that we're wasting into dollars, economic development. The mayor just talked about it before. We're not talking in just environmental stuff, taking it out of the waste stream. It's jobs, it's economic value, and it's resources. So this is what we're talking about, and this is the mindset that we have to get into, is that it's bad business. It's inefficiency, it's a lot of waste on the environmental side, but also on the business side. So again, what's the problem? Well, the problem is that we're not paying the full cost for the products. There's product cost, there's these kind of externalities, social and environmental externalities that are going out into the environment. It's the so-called tragedy of the commons that Garrett Hardin talked about, that, it's okay, it's a little bit of, so it's not just my waste going out there, but everyone's got their own waste going out, and there's a bigger problem. We are not internalizing those costs into the product. So you have some products like the 7th generations or so that have really made it their business mission to try to lower the impact from their products, but then you have their competitors that aren't doing that. That's not a level playing field. And that's what we got to get to, is a level playing field. All right, so these problems are being pushed down to the government, and governments have had to deal with these problems. So the government's not that well equipped, I think we should know right now, to deal with these problems. You guys are all doing a great job, but it's just not happening, and we know that. I've been in this field for 30 years. I was the waste policy director in Massachusetts. I've over and over and over again. That's why I started the organization, is because I was fed up, and I was with national organizations, with others, and they were all fed up with not having the skills, not having the funding, not having the ability to really change things. So what do we have? We have a lack of infrastructure, and I see this on every single product that we work on. Every product, bar none. A lack of infrastructure for collecting the products that are out there, even though we have waste managements and lots of others that are out there building that infrastructure. There's no funding to hire and to set that infrastructure. Once we have the infrastructure, people don't know what to do with the products. They don't know that the products are toxic. They don't know what to do with those products. And once they know what to do and there's a place to bring it, you do have to have incentive to get the majority of folks to want to act. And there's a lack of incentive. So let me step back and say, all right, what is this product stewardship? What is EPR? Well, the way we define it, and let me say there's lots of definitions, and we can go into this for hours and hours, and I'm working with the Product Policy Institute, the California Product Stewardship Council, and others to try to get a universal definition, but there's lots of definitions out there. But we define it as a policy that ensures that all those involved in the life cycle of a product share responsibility for reducing the health and environmental impacts, with producers having the primary financial and management responsibility. It's gotta rest somewhere, and it needs to rest with the producer. Now, EPR, extended producer responsibility, we find as a subset of that, focused more on the back end, more on a legislative driver. So where product stewardship is broader, you hear the sustainability word out there. It goes upstream all the way to the mining and the transportation of the material, all those aspects that are involved in making a product. All that is part of product stewardship, but the back end, we say, is extended producer responsibility. That's where there's legislation, and that's what I'm going to talk a lot about today. We need to work on the full life cycle, okay? But product stewardship could be voluntary or legislative, EPR legislative. So the benefits of product stewardship, and this is something I want to really, we need to get into our consciousness that there's going to be some cost for this, right? Because there are already costs. There's social and environmental external costs. If we're going to reduce those or eliminate those costs, it needs to come somewhere. And the whole concept of product stewardship is that it's internalized by the companies so that we don't have these impacts. But what the public debate is about is that the cost that we're going to pay, the consumer is going to pay a little bit more for the product, has to be worth it. Sometimes it may not be, and it may not be a good policy. But what we need to craft together, and that's why it's important to have all the different stakeholders so you get the efficiency, the benefits that derive from it need to be more than the costs of that program. Because you don't get something for nothing. It's what, the second law in thermodynamics, there's going to be a cost somewhere. We are already incurring those costs right now. So you have greater environmental protection by taking the toxics out of the waste stream, by collecting materials, but there's going to be a fiscal relief, billions of dollars for government. We're talking billions and billions of dollars for local governments here that you're paying right now that can be internalized into those costs for those products and the jobs. And I think Will talk more about the calculations for this, but it's pretty well known in terms of recycling. 5 to 10 times as many jobs are created from recycling as disposal. So there's a lot of recycling jobs, and I can go into lots of anecdotal information, even from the 10 years that we've been doing this, maybe over the last 5 years, we see lots of changes in the field where companies are creating jobs and they're creating value in their companies through recycling. So product stewardship needs to be seen as an investment. We're investing in the future, we're investing in better products, we're investing in reduced impacts in the future and leveling that playing field for the better products. All right, a little bit about this EPR. Try to get it down to the real basic level. So EPR does assign responsibility for implementing and financing the collection and recycling. So it's assigning responsibility to the producer, but it's not mandating any type of collection system. So it's saying, okay, here's the goals where you want to reach, here's the destination where you want to go, and you can get there any way you feel like you can get there. It can't be prescribed. It can't be, is it a bottle bill? Maybe. Is it curbside collection? Is it single string? Is it dual stream? Is it away from home? What's the mix? Leave it up to the brand owners to figure that out. Product stewardship does make those who choose the product or packaging design responsible for implementing the program, but it doesn't say that you need to use this kind of material or that kind of product. It's not dictating. So we're moving away from government programs to those where we're setting parameters, and it's a whole different approach. And if you look in Canada, for example, where product stewardship is very prevalent. You'll see that the different provinces have different types of programs, and the one which is surfacing now, we highlighted this at our last conference, is British Columbia. We call it like government light, if you will, where they set the parameters and then they step back. They even let the producers of the goods set the goals. They say, well, here's a couple of ways to do it. You might want to look over here. These are some good systems. But you guys, just propose to us what you think the goals should be, when you think you should get there. And hopefully, Sean, maybe you can talk about this too, because we were talking about it here in terms of the battery programs, how they're run. Well, Ontario, Quebec, Manitoba, they have different types of systems, so EPR isn't the same thing. So what we want to take from these other systems in Canada and Europe is the best that they have to offer and see what works here in the United States. And what's resonating the most that I see is government light, if you will, where government is setting up the framework, the structure, and then getting out of the way, guiding, enforcing that level playing field, but letting the industry figure out how to get there. And most importantly is moving from the taxpayer-funded government programs to where the costs are internalized into the cost of the product, as I was saying before. So the whole concept for product stewardship is if you are a brand owner and you sell a product, that you're responsible for that product at the end of life. So if you own this product at the end of life, you can be pretty well assured that you're going to want that material to have as much value as possible so that you could sell it, you could reuse it, you could have options for it. So that's the concept. If you're designing and making this product here and you own it in the back end, you're going to want to make sure that you have the most value. So you're going to take the toxics out, reuse that product, have it reusable, have it recyclable, and that is the connection that is missing right now, because it's made, boom, out the door, and then government has to deal with this product that is changing all the time, value changes, and it impacts the cost of your programs. And I have to say, it's not that direct for every single product. I think electronics, there's design changes that probably happen because of competitive issues and other things. But there's other products, and we can debate this. It is a debate in the field about, how does EPR affect the design and how much for each product. But if you're owning that product in the back end, you're going to want that to be made of gold, if you will, to have some value so that you can reuse that again. All right, I want to talk a little bit about voluntary and legislative programs, because this is another big issue in the field, and it's one which I think perhaps is misunderstood. And we work, let me just make it clear, our organization supports both voluntary and legislative programs. We think that both of them are very important. They both have roles to play, but if we're talking about EPR, EPR works with legislative programs. I have not seen it work with voluntary programs. But with that, let me say that there are lots of great voluntary programs, and you're going to hear about them in a little bit. You've got the Call to Recycle program that's been around for over a dozen years. You have Best Buy's program. Whole Foods is great. I just went into my Whole Foods store recently. I can't believe all the products that you guys are collecting. It's fabulous. These are industry leaders. We worked with Staples in 2004 to design, implement, and evaluate the country's first computer take-back program. And that really changed the dynamic. It was a time where we were doing national dialogues on electronics. The retailers were not engaged at all. And we worked with Staples to show that it could be part of their business model. They could collect in the store. Their employees loved it. The customers loved it. We showed them how it could be done in a way which they could actually charge money for. We said, you can't lose money. You got to charge it. Wait until there's systems in place. There's laws in place where you don't have to charge. In the 25 states now, or most of them right now, where there's laws on electronics. But all across the country now, there is a Staples program where you can collect these electronics. So this is something, again, we support the voluntary programs. And there's a role for it. So if you think in terms of why you need the voluntary, or how they can work, if you have a toner cartridge, it has value to it. If you have lead acid, the car batteries, it has value to it. So we call that kind of positive value. So to collect transport and recycle that product, once you sell it, you're going to be able to make up all that money for it. You don't need an EPR system. They're working. They're working. Voluntary systems work for many different products, but they don't work for a lot of other products, like pharmaceuticals, medical sharps, fluorescent lamps, thermostats, paint, yada, yada, yada. Lots of things they don't because they have negative, we call negative value. There needs to be some money in the system to pay for the collection and processing. But voluntary systems work for a whole bunch of products. It could also be interim steps for legislation, as I was saying, for the Staples or the Best Buy or all the other programs. Ramp it up because Staples was well positioned for any legislation that was going to come down the pike. It addresses the sustainability issues that I was talking about. So now I'm focused here on the back end, but there's so much that goes all the way up on the front end. A lot of time, or I'd say, you look at a life cycle assessment, much of that impact is on the mining and the manufacture of that product. Well, there's a lot on the supply chain. Walmart's done a great job in looking at the supply chain and reducing the impacts all along the life cycle in the sustainability world, many others as well. And then it allows for the industry sector leaders to emerge. You don't have to wait for the full industry to rise. Well, regulated systems, we see that they're necessary to address these market failures. These externalities, that's a market failure. If the industries were able to, were collecting all these products, really we wouldn't be here talking about EPR. You need, again, there's a government need, and this may sound radical in some ways. I think we've lost the balance between regulation and free market. I'm reading Thomas Friedman's book, That Used to Be Us. It's really talking about what's going on here. We see it reflected in product stewardship as well. We have lost the ability in our country, wider than product stewardship, of seeing how regulation can be the framework for free market and for prosperity. Because we think you take away all the regulation and things are going to prosper. And I think that we look at the voluntary systems on EPR and we can see that they haven't worked that well. So you need some push, you need some goals, you need some framework, and then things will happen. So we see that's what the regulations can do. And in particular, they send a signal to the private sector. I can't tell you how many companies come up to us, and particularly recyclers, and say, I just wish that this legislation would pass on this product in this state, because I'm ready. Our business is ready to set up shop and to recycle. That's why we're working with the Canadians. They're so interested. They've come down, and I was going to talk about it a little bit later, but my train of thought is here. We're working with them on the Northeast, Quebec. They're interested in product stewardship because of economic development. They are years ahead of us. Their companies have already set up shop, the recyclers, they have systems, and they see that we're starting to get product stewardship in the United States, which means more supply of raw materials, more supply. They're really interested. And so we're working on an it's northeastern initiative with the eastern Canadian provinces. There's one going on the west coast. British Columbia has come down and talked to California, Oregon, and Washington. We're now looking to harmonize across the way. People are doing this because there's business here. It's sending the signal. When legislation happens in a location, you're sending the signal that there's going to be supply. The Amazon Environmental is a recycled paint manufacturer. They are setting up shop in Connecticut because Connecticut passed the third law on paint. They're coming to Connecticut, setting up shop right there. I was just at our conference and I met a recycled paint manufacturer that's a huge company that said that they're going to come down in the Northeast. They're interested in setting up shop because they see that there's paint supply is going to be there because most of the paint, leftover paint that's collected is thrown out. So these regulated systems send a signal to the private sector, and that is really important. And they level the playing field and so forth to give the companies a level playing field to play on. All right, so let's take a look at the legislated framework. So in 2000, when our organization came around, there were a couple of laws on EPR, on batteries particularly, but in 2011 now, there's 70 different laws in 32 states on 10 different product categories. So you see around 2005, 2006, things started to really jump up. And here's the map that we update really daily as much as activity takes place. California leading the country, not surprisingly, with 6 EPR laws. You have Maine and Vermont having 5, and then others in between, Texas having the electronics law, and a lot of your neighbors having 1 as well. So this is the landscape in the United States in 2011. Here's another cut at it, looking at the products. Starting in the bottom left, those are 3 laws on paint, 3 on lamps, fluorescent lamps, 8 on batteries, goes to thermostats, auto switches, which have some mercury in them, and then electronics. And these are the EPR laws. There's one other, California, which is an advanced recycling fee on electronics. Another cut at it. Here's the, on the left side, you see the laws. There's the 10 products for where there's on which there's EPR laws. On the right are the legislation for 2010 and 11, and on the green area, those are the newer products that are starting to percolate up. And I want to thank Bob and the City of Austin for helping us to get the mattress program off the ground. We're working on mattresses nationally. I had no idea that was a big issue. The City of Hartford is spending $500,000 a year on mattresses. They are really fed up. They've got no help from the industry, and we're working on EPR legislation. Again, long story here. I can talk about it more. Developed some stakeholder meetings, research with the industry, working together, and we're moving ahead on mattresses thanks to the City of Austin and City of Hartford and others in Connecticut. But these are the newer products, and every year there's sort of new products that come up, so it keeps us very busy, as you can imagine. All right, here's the legislative landscape. 2011, about 15 states introduced legislation. On the right, you see the laws that are passed in Vermont. They have the 3rd law in the country on lamps. Connecticut, the 3rd law for paint. And Utah, the 24th in the nation EPR for electronics. Then you added TVs, which is quite an accomplishment here. So congratulations on that. Local ordinances and federal as well. I could talk a lot more about this. Just wanted to touch on it because there's a player. Right? Local governments will agitate usually if the states are not doing their job and trying to get something going at the state level. We see some of the counties like San Luis Obispo and Dane County, they've introduced retail requirements to collect back. We don't see that in very many pieces of legislation at all, but they're trying to get something going. Whatever power that they have, they're trying to make it happen. See electronics, New York City, pharmaceuticals, San Francisco. The phone books has been interesting, these opt-out and opt-in to get source reduction going in San Francisco and Seattle. Those were really very key initiatives. The industry took Seattle to court and they lost on that. So I would think more will spread on that local government making things happen. On the federal side, we see pharmaceuticals and electronics are the 2 areas. And much of this activity is happening at the state because it's so new. Right? These systems are very new. We're trying to get models. We're trying to figure it out, all of us together. And then we can move to the federal level once we have really good models. And that's sort of the thought process in EPR. On pharmaceuticals, you know about it. There's controlled substances like OxyContin and dangerous products. There's a Drug Enforcement Administration has a system in place right now that is, you have law enforcement that needs to collect. It's very cumbersome, very expensive. So we worked in Congress. We did a lot of lobbying. Sierra Fletcher from my staff lobbied in Congress to change the Controlled Substances Act. It was a multi-stakeholder initiative, and it will reduce the cost of collection and reduce the red tape in these take-backs for pharmaceuticals. It's a big health issue, it's a big safety issue, even more so than environmental. That's what's driving that issue, but we needed a federal fix. Also, last month, we worked with Representative Louise Slaughter from New York to introduce the first piece of EPR legislation on pharmaceuticals. And it's really the first federal EPR bill that we consider as a strong bill on any product in a really long time. So it's moving forward on a piece of federal legislation because you need the federal fix on pharmaceuticals. On electronics, the issue has been more on what happens to the collection of the electronics and having responsible recycling. So that's where this export ban comes in place to make sure that the products are being responsibly collected. So our organization does a lot of things. We do pilot projects, we build capacity for product stewardship is what we call it, education. We work on a lot of product stewardship councils, initiatives, and so forth to really bring these lofty concepts down on the ground, figure out what states' priorities are. We also do legislative tracking, analysis, and advocacy at times. But I wanted to talk a little bit about our work on the facilitation and the consensus building, because that is why I founded the organization and what we are most well known for. So our role in the dialogues is to convene stakeholders. We've done it on about 13 different product categories and over the past decade to bring stakeholders together and to seek their interests. And again, as I said, you need to start with the problem. You need to figure out, get consensus on that. You need to then move to what's the focus of the initiative, because it was pharmaceuticals and personal care products. It's huge. We said, let's just do pharmaceuticals. That's big enough for now. Focus it down, figure out the goals. What are you trying to do? Get everyone aligned with the goals. You need to know where you're headed. Then figure out the barriers to getting to those goals, and then figure out the solutions. It's a recipe that has worked, and it's gotten the groups that we've worked with far along. Some we've gotten all the way to the end where there's full agreements, and others midway along the points. So now I'm just talking about the EPR. Not voluntary initiatives, but the EPR dialogues to change the dynamics, to change the whole way solid waste is managed and paid for here. So why do businesses engage? It's pretty clear. It's either risks or there's opportunities. And I'd say that there's good reasons, as you can read here, what they are, but my disappointment over the past 10 years, and I've done a lot of reflection because our organization's 10 years old, you have to think back, the single thing, the strongest driver has been legislation. It's been not only just introducing legislation, it has to be a serious threat of legislation. Again, when I started the organization, I founded the organization 10 years ago. It was to bring groups together so it wouldn't have to be knock them down, and in the legislature to do it. To do it outside, come together, and bring a piece of legislation together or policy together. And what I have to say is that it has not been that way. It's the serious threat of legislation that will motivate the brand owners in our country to make these changes. And here's some of the things that I hear in green over and over again. And again, I think about this book because this book is about losing our competitive advantage in the world. And I just see resonance with, it's almost like it's no, no, no. We can't do it. We shouldn't do it. It's not us. It's different for us. There's all these excuses instead of engaging. And I think that if there's one message, I think it's important to engage. And I think that many of the brand owners have engaged to a certain level. I see it waning right now. Again, perhaps with the reflecting overall the politics and other aspects, there's less engagement and there's more interest in just saying, go away, we can do it ourselves, and we'll take care of it. And I think that's unfortunate, but that's what I'm seeing. So we don't see the engagement that's necessary, and maybe this isn't a message that you want to hear, but again, I'm just kind of talking straight from the 10 years. This is what I see. This is the experience with all these industries. The latest thing, last week we got a press release from the Product Management Alliance. They were formed just last week. They are a national coalition of organizations supporting market-based solutions for EPR. Great. That is what EPR is. It's about market-based solutions within that framework. But they just want purely voluntary and opposed to any legislation. And here's the groups now that are part of that coalition, some which have had failed voluntary initiatives, other ones which are engaged in legislation, and so we need to see how this shakes out. Again, we support voluntary initiatives. It needs to be in a certain framework. Here's the groups that we've worked with, and you can see I've plotted them on a low to high scale in terms of engagement with, and not just with our organization. Again, we represent thousands of state and local government officials that we work with in the 47 states. All that we partner with the retailers, the Retail Industry Leaders Association is a partner of ours. We have many companies that are partners of ours because we're known for as a group that wants to work with the businesses and bring them together because all the stakeholders have a voice. It's all valid, it's all needed in order to have a good solution. So the paint industry is by far the group that has come out and worked from beginning to end with us. And all these other groups, I can go through them, which I don't have time here, but I can talk about all the path that they've taken. And this is the work that all of us are trying to do, is try to engage and really have greater understanding and move to a greater level of engagement. So with paint, we've worked with the industry now about 9 years. It started, they said it's not our problem. Paint is a product that's meant to be used up. Shouldn't be any left over, it's not our problem. And we went through a whole cycle, and I didn't put down the cycle here. There's a whole, the whole range of industry sort of changes too that we've noticed, and my Canadian counterparts and I have put something together that's a range of industry changes here. But the paint industry started at a place where they said it's not our problem, and they've ended where they're taking full responsibility for all the leftover latex and oil-based paint generated in the US, which is about 75 million gallons a year. It costs government over $500 million a year to manage, and they have grabbed hold of this. They're moving ahead with it, and we facilitated 2 agreements with all the different stakeholders, including US EPA, the retailers, etc. Lots of different groups. There's consensus legislation and a model that the industry has introduced, supported, and passed in Oregon, California, and Connecticut. It'll be rolled out in 6 other states, and then rolled out nationally. So hopefully it can come here, we can figure a way to bring it to Texas. And they're looking at about $6 million of savings for the state of Oregon. All right, a little bit on thermostats. That's at the high level of engagement. Now thermostats kind of one down. So we had 2 meetings with the thermostat manufacturers in about 2004. Collaborative, we had 5 or 6 agreements together, voluntary agreements to increase their industry-funded program, the TRC program, to collect from wholesaler chains. We